watching Goal Line Extended, presented by Lacrosse Flash.
What's going on, lacrosse fans? Welcome to Goal Line Extended on the Lacrosse Flash Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ryan Hulsebos, and whether you are watching or listening on any podcast platform or obviously watching on YouTube, we're glad that you're here, as after having just 2 weekends of meaningful PLL lacrosse in the past 5 weeks, we will be treated to back-to-back weekends here to close out the month of August. As the former, this past weekend, week 8, it was the biggest weekend in the PLL's 3-year history with 6 games over 3 days. The latter of the two this weekend will feature 3 quarterfinal matchups with the Archers and Chaos on Friday night, followed by the Atlas and the Cannons on Saturday afternoon on NBC, followed by the Whipsnakes and the Redwoods to close out the weekend on Saturday out in Salt Lake City, Utah, with the semifinal spots on the line, as 3 more teams will join the Water Dogs in the semifinals on September 5th in the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And joining me today to talk PLL quarterfinals, waiver wire pickups, injury reports, and more is Harrison Silcox, Flash writer and analyst. Harry, welcome back to GLE, my friend. Glad to have you as always. How are we feeling here, middle of the week ahead of this quarterfinal weekend?
Excited. I'm excited we've got PLL playoffs back. There's kind of a different feeling to it than what it was in the bubble last year. It kind of feels like a return to what it was like back in 2019. So absolutely. I'm just pumped for this game.
The field has now been trimmed from 8 teams to 7 teams, as we saw the Chrome eliminated. We'll see 6 play this weekend as the Water Dogs, the top seed in the league. They have punched their ticket to that semifinal round already. And before we get into this quarterfinal slate, let's stick here and talk about the Water Dogs for a sec, because earlier this week, among the handful of moves that were made ahead of the waiver deadline, which we'll get to as we go matchup by matchup here, and one of them was made by the Water Dogs, so we'll get to that in a moment. But in the middle of all of that, we saw Michael Sowers' name land back on the injured list, the second overall pick for the Water Dogs, who hasn't seen the field since sustaining a head injury back in week 1. His status is unknown going into this weekend, which doesn't really matter for the Water Dogs. They won't be playing this weekend, so he'll have another week plus next week's bye to get fully healthy ahead of the semifinals. So promising signs, though, Harry, going in, that we should see him back come the semifinals and back to the Michael Sowers that we were expecting this season and that we saw at Princeton and Duke over the past 5 years.
Yeah, obviously you're pretty optimistic. If you're a Water Dogs fan, you see Michael Sowers pop up in that injury report. It looks like, it kind of opens the door a little bit. Could this guy come in? Could he step in and play for the Water Dogs? We obviously haven't seen him since week 1 when he did obviously get hit in the back of the head and hurt himself. And he was pretty good in that debut. I mean, a lot of crease violations kind of held him off the score sheet a little bit later than he would have hoped. But when you're going into this bye week and you're the Water Dogs and you're just looking for a little bit more momentum, because, I think they're the hottest team in the PLL right now, having your number 2 overall pick possibly join you, that could be a huge storyline to follow as the next few weeks unfold.
Ahead of week 7, all signs pointed to Sowers returning. He did not. It also looked very promising going into last weekend against the Atlas that he would make his return. He also sat out of that game. So Coach Copeland being very careful with his top draft pick of 2021. And I'd imagine we do see him in a few weeks. But I do know that for in terms of the postseason waivers, the players who get injured and replaced during the postseason, they are ineligible then to return. I don't think that's the case for players who come into the playoffs on the injured list. So we will hopefully see, obviously, Sowers in this situation. Obviously, we have TD Erlin. We'll talk about his name in a little bit, but Sowers hopefully going to be suiting up in early September for this Water Dogs team with a spot in the championship on the line. And with that move to put Sowers back on that injured list, we're looking at it here. It kind of makes sense now. Obviously, you have him. You can put him on that injury list. We're believing it's temporarily, but Andy Copeland, he's able now to add another player to fill out that full 25 ahead of the playoffs. So now I guess questions do come up. Oh, will Sowers return? Do you stick with that 25? Will he come back? If he comes back, I'd imagine the Water Dogs will have to trim off another player. But he brings in Coach Copeland, Archers midfielder Christian Mazzone, who's missed the Archers starting 19 and reserves the past few weekends. He's got 3 goals and 2 assists in 4 games this season, all coming in the first 4 weeks of the season. And Harry, this seems like a long-term ad here for this Water Dogs team. So I'd imagine if Sowers was to return, obviously the hope is that he returns, Copeland would need to release someone else to get back down to 25. But this, bringing in Mazzone, this is a big addition for this War Dogs midfield, a guy that scored 9 goals in 6 games last summer, shooting 69%. His rookie season in 2019 in the MLL, he averaged 2 goals a game, shooting over 15%, excuse me. This is a guy, he isn't afraid to put his body on the line, take a hit if it means he'll get a better shot. So I'm looking at this, a real gritty player getting added to a really gritty team. I like this add by Copeland. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I like it a lot too. I think it makes perfect sense at this point in the season for the kind of roster that Copeland has filled out here now in his second year with the Water Dogs. And I think one reason why it's such a good add when you go into the playoffs, some people might wonder, oh, does it shake up the locker room? Is there, how's the chemistry going to work out? Christian Mazzone, to me, doesn't really seem like a guy where it's going to take time for him to fit into a lineup. You kind of mentioned it. He's just going to go out in these games. He's going to grind. He's not afraid to take hits. He's going to scrap for loose balls. He'll play as hard as he possibly can when you give him minutes, and he's not going to get in the way of your stars like somebody like a Zach Courier or potentially, you mentioned a Michael Sowers or a Ryan Brown. I mean, Mazzone's just going to go out and fit in very well with how he plays, which is that gritty style, going after loose balls, kind of the trash goals in front of the crease where you get a rebound. I mean, he's probably going to be in there to make a play on that. So I think it's a great add for this Water Dogs team, and he'll be a great spark plug too coming off of the bye week, because the bye week, it's more than just 1 week. It's one game, but it's 3 weeks. They're not playing until
additional week. There's an additional week here between the quarterfinal and the semifinal, the additional bye. So it would be 2 weeks here for the Water Dogs before the semifinal.
Yeah, and so you've got fresh legs in the zone. He's going to grind, and you've already got a team that fits that play style. I love the addition.
It's a full weekend, too, if you think about it. The semifinals are on a Sunday, so obviously we're used to Friday, Saturday, Sunday games. This weekend, we're only going to have Friday and then 2 games on Saturday. But for the semifinal, then come the championship, just games on Sunday. So for this Water Dogs team, full week this week, full week next week, along with the rest of the league, and then they'll have the full weekend before their semifinal game on Sunday. But you talk about Mazzone. I mean, they already have there, the Water Dogs, 2 of the best, I guess you could short stick defensive midi, just wing guys. Obviously, Zach Courier, being the top name that we all think of. Ryan Conrad, has also had a great season there for the Water Dogs. So Christian Mazzone will look to slot in with those 2 guys, whether it's playing on the face-off wings, playing offensively, defensively there on the midfield. But we will see how Coach Copeland and the Water Dogs plan to use Mazzone. As you said there, he looks to add another spark to the number 1 seeded team in the league heading into the playoffs as the Water Dogs ride a 4-game winning streak straight to the semifinals, as the Water Dogs will be one of 2 teams not playing this week. The other will be the Chrome, as they lost last weekend against the Cannons, failing to clinch that final playoff spot. And Harry, with the end of the Chrome season, we saw the end of 2 great careers on Saturday afternoon as goalie John Galloway, LSM Joel White. They announced their retirements from the field game, 2 of the best to ever do it at their respective positions, and they are the first 2 players of the offseason to announce their retirement, with Redwoods midfielder Kyle Harrison set to become the 3rd at the end of the season. We'll see if anybody follows. But head coach Tim Sudan, he wasted no time ahead of Monday's waiver deadline. He added defenseman Eric Rubak and goalie Nick Washuta to fill out his 25 ahead of the offseason, which seems like long-term ads here by Sudan, Harry. A young goalie to fill Galloway's spot on the depth chart for now, behind 2-time MLL goalie of the year Sean Scanoni, and then a 2021 first-team All-SoCon defenseman to possibly pair along with the 2021 Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year Nick Grill, who Sudan just acquired, and then he got 2021 ACC Defensive Player of the Year, the 3rd overall pick of the college draft, JT Gallows-Harris, who hasn't played yet this season due to an injury.
Yeah, savvy move there to see Sudan do that with the Chrome roster. And yeah, he acted quickly. Season's over, and he immediately starts looking to 2022. These are some nice depth adds to the roster that the Chrome already has, and then it kind of gives him, I guess, less thought process. That may not be the right way to put it, but they're going to have the number 1 overall pick next year, assuming that nothing changes in that draft order, or a 9th team doesn't come into this league or something along those lines. They're going to have the top college draft pick. And so I think a helpful thing about this here for the Chrome is, do you try to bolster the defense, which is what some people were thinking before they make these moves and bringing a guy like Rubak. So I think that it tells me that the Chrome is going to go all in on not trading that first overall pick, and they're going to pick, whoever winds up there at the end of the college season. I think a lot of people immediately jump to somebody like Chris Gray at North Carolina. We'll have to see how the college season shakes out and who winds up getting that number one pick, but a smart move for the future. And I don't think one that a lot of people were thinking about. And we're kind of living in the now, thinking about the playoffs. Chrome get eliminated. What are they going to do with their pick? Well, before they even get there, before we even get to the off season, that's an off season move there for the Chrome. So surprised by it, makes a lot of sense, and a smart move by Sudan that I don't think many people expected.
Definitely didn't see this coming. You're thinking obviously waiver wire, end of the season waiver wire. It's teams trying to get ready, trying to get their lineups prepared for the playoffs. Obviously, the Chrome, the only team not in the playoffs. They go out and make 2 additions. Obviously, makes sense though. You got 2 guys retiring. League kind of helps them out, I guess. They get rid of those guys off the roster there for the Chrome, allowing them to bring in 2 new players. But the Chrome will look for a quick turnaround heading into 2022, kind of similar to what we saw the Atlas do here coming into 2021. But the Chrome, they are the first team to be eliminated this season. No consolation bracket, as we saw one in 2019, means that they will select first overall in next year's college draft, as Harry said there before, which could mean another defenseman to play alongside Grill and Giles Harris and the rest of this defensive unit in front of Sean Scanoni. It could mean, as Harry said there before, Chris Gray joining an attack that could see Jordan Wolf and Randy Stotts make their returns there in 2022. So as Austin Owens and I said earlier in the week on the PLL Flash, if you are a Chrome fan, just sit back, relax, enjoy the playoffs. Your team's not in it, so you can just enjoy these games, and you can live with the satisfaction that next season this team should be right back in the mix competing for a title like it was last season out in Utah. But let's move on here. Chrome definitely looking like they're already getting set for 2022. But we have 3 quarterfinal matchups to dive into here as the PLL heads out west to Salt Lake City. And we're going to start with the first one of the weekend, as on Friday night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern on Peacock and NBCSN. In a rematch of last Friday night's game, we will see the Archers and the Chaos square off with a spot in Philadelphia at stake. The rubber match of what's been 2 games already this season between these 2 teams. The Archers were able to steal the first one back in week 2 after falling behind early in the first quarter. The Chaos took game 2 last weekend behind 4 fourth quarter goals, 7 in total in that second half. And Harry, let's start with the Chaos, because we know the Archers have been hot all season. They start off 3-0, dropped their next 3, but all in 1 goal margins. Their only other loss coming to the Chaos in a single possession game just last weekend. The plus 24 goal differential kind of tells you all you need to know. But this Chaos team, despite sitting down in that 6th seed, have really started to turn things around here over the past couple of weeks, as after starting the season 0-3, Andy Towers' team has won 4 of 6. So getting hot at the right time, it seems, down the stretch here, Harry, is the Chaos. They'll go into Utah without attacking Chris Claudia, as he's been placed on the injured reserve after sustaining what looked like a shoulder injury over the weekend. His absence this weekend, how much does that hurt this Chaos team, especially now that we're down into elimination lacrosse?
We'll see. I think one thing that Andy Towers has built with the Chaos is obviously that Canadian type atmosphere. So I don't know if Cloutier's absence is really going to be a backbreaker for this team. I really like the offense when Josh Byrne and Dane Smith are heavily involved. And I think that if those 2 are heavily involved come this matchup against the Archers and throughout the playoffs, possibly, I think they're in really good hands. Obviously, the chemistry's there from them playing together. In the NLL, I think Dane Smith coming out of the midfield, first off, his size is like the first thing that stands out to me, but his vision out of the midfield is something that I think is very underrated.
Passes that are absolutely wild. It's like you look at Miles Jones passes, like Miles Jones passes are great, but it's like Dane Smith passes. He's hitting some guys like off shoulder, like very, very tight windows. Dane Smith is finding skip lanes.
And it's with kind of this casual, laid back kind of feel to it, where he's throwing a pass through a lane that doesn't seem like it's there or is barely there, and he somehow threads that needle. And I think that works really well. And then Josh Byrne, we obviously know the elite player that he is, especially when he can get inside. So I think if those 2 get going, they have enough in the surrounding cast on their offense, like Mac O'Keefe, to help them out. When those two get going, I mean, the defense's attention can only be in so many different places. When you have an outside shooting threat like a Mac O'Keefe and some of the other guys on this team, I think that they can really stand out. And then also Chase Frazier, who was awesome this past weekend for the Chaos. You talk about getting hot at the right time. I know that they wind up losing to the Redwoods on Sunday, but Frazier really feels like he's starting to get really comfortable with that team right now. My concern with the Chaos, I think what they need to do more than anything, though, is limit the amount of shots that Blaise Reardon sees. Blaise is a phenomenal goalie and keeps the Chaos in a lot of these games. I mean, he's made more saves than anybody else in the PLL this year. And a big part of that is because the amount of shots that he sees per game, he's seeing like 30 shots a game, and on average, we've got teams who are putting on about 24 shots on goal per game. So like the Chaos are way above what most teams are putting up on average. But when teams play against them, they're getting their shots off and they're able to pepper Blaise. And he still has the best save percentage in the PLL, which speaks to how good he is. But imagine in some of these close games, a 1-goal game, whatever it may be, if you can limit the amount of shots that your all-star goalie is seeing, I think that totally changes things for the Chaos.
All-star goalie, two-time PLL goalie of the year, Blaise Reardon. Obviously, he with his save percentage, I believe he is, if not tied for the lead in save percentage, he is a point below the top of the league, but obviously one of our most likely, I'd imagine, finalists here, favorite, I'd imagine, for the goalie of the year here in 2021. But as you're saying, limit the number of shots on Blaise. You could get a better result here if you're the Chaos. But going back here to Chris Claudia, he was acquired by Coach Towers from the Atlas over the offseason. He comes in already, obviously has a lot of familiarity with the Buffalo Bandits, the other Canadians on that Chaos team. He's played a huge role. He scored a point in all but one game, a goal in all but two this season, and he's averaging just over 2 points per game here in 2021. So a big loss here for this Chaos team. I'd imagine he's a scratch this weekend, given that he was just placed on the IR ahead of the playoffs, but we will see come Thursday or Friday when the rosters are released. Andy Towers has not added another player to fill Cloutier's spot, so the Chaos will go into Friday night with 24 players if Cloutier isn't activated. Something to watch heading into Friday night. But we saw Chase Frazier, as you said before, step up big over the weekend. Ian McKay has been lethal in big moments for this team, so the Chaos will hope that they can continue to step up when needed, obviously, with the brunt of the load to be carried by Byrne, by Blaise, Jack Rowlett defensively. We will see how they can match up against an Archers team that has been red hot all season, despite the 4 blemishes on the record each. As we said before, came by just 1 possession last Friday against the Chaos, their first by over a goal. They come into this Friday night, the Archers, fully healthy. They're actually the only team all season that hasn't been hit by the injury bug. The only really roster disparity was Trey Leclerc, the rookie, spending some time on the unavailable to travel list early in the season. But they're led by a few of the best players in the game, the Archers. That have been notably playing at their best here in 2021, whether it's the top-ranked defense in the league, led by Defensive Player of the Year finalist, most likely Graham Hossack. Matt McMahon and Scott Ratliff have also been staples for now the past 3 seasons. Warren Jeffrey, rookie Jared Connors making huge impacts as well. The offense, led by points leader Grant Amen, has been firing on all cylinders all season. They're second in the league in goals. Guys like Will Manny, Marcus Holman, rookie Trey Leclerc have been on the other end of a lot of those assists from Amen. And Connor Fields also having a phenomenal comeback season after his struggles last summer with the Chaos. He'll now have a third chance to play his former team this season in big stakes. And then Tom Schreiber, didn't mention his name, a season where Amen leads the league in points. Manny is at the top of the league in goals. Schreiber, as consistent as they come, puts up 14 goals and 13 assists, averaging 3 points a game. And Harry, there's a ton of weapons offensively on this team, but last Friday, the Chaos were able to hold them pretty quiet, as this Archers was held to just 9 goals, just 4 in the second half. How do the Archers change that offensively heading into the weekend? And then on the flip side, how did the Chaos continue that success against one of the league's most prolific offensive units?
I wouldn't change much about the offense personally. I mean, I think that this offense is so lethal as it is. I mean, lacrosse can be weird sometimes. Sometimes you're going to have games where you're not going to score as many goals. Sometimes you run into a hot goalie, whatever it may be. But, I mean, you just listed off all of the players and their accomplishments just this season that's on that offense. Grant Ament, one of them, who in some people's eyes is the front runner for MVP. You got Tom Schreiber coming out of the midfield, the addition of Connor Fields that they brought in. Will Manny, Marcus Holman. It feels like the names just go on and on and on with that Archers offense. And even before Grant Ament was there, they were already one of the best offenses in the PLL. My biggest concern with them this season was, can they stay healthy? You mentioned that they stayed healthy throughout the year. Hopefully they can stay healthy through the playoffs. If you remember, Tom Schreiber hurt his shoulder in the semifinal against the Redwoods back in 2019. They went into that halftime leading by 1 goal. Who knows what happens if Schreiber is able to play that entire game? I think the offense has always been there. The one thing that stopped the Archers from getting over the hump and getting to that championship game is their defense. And I don't ever think it was necessarily bad, but it did need some improvement. And they were able to do that this offseason. I think defense has now become a very tough and physical group. You mentioned Graham Hossack, some of those newcomers, Warren Jeffrey, Latrell Harris, another one. This Archers defense, I think, is similar names on it, but it's totally different than what we've seen in years past. And if they can keep up that physicality and continue that into the postseason, I think that is what is going to carry them to a championship if they want to get there. So that's what I'm watching with the Archers, is not necessarily is the offense going to be there, because I think the shots, at least the shots, we know that they're going to be there. Blaise could have something to say about that. But the defense is what could carry this team to that next level.
Archers boasting the best defense in the league this season, or in the regular season, I should say. I believe 95 goals is the lowest total given up this season by a defense. The Archers hold that record. You mentioned Latrell Harris's name before. Our editor-in-chief, Austin Owens, he just wrote a piece for the league, a feature on Latrell Harris, so make sure to check that out. It's at PLL.com, but we'll see the number 3 Archers and the number 6 Chaos set to meet this Friday night with a spot in Philadelphia on the line. And Harry, as we go game by game, we'll make our picks here. The rest of our Flash Stat picks will be out ahead of this game Friday afternoon, but I'll start first. I want to point out that I think this game might be the best matchup of the weekend. Like I said before, this will be the 3rd meeting of the season between these two teams, even though in all 3 games this weekend, we will actually see teams that have played each other twice so far, which is interesting because 7 teams, 9 games played. Each team played each other team, but then there were 2 teams that every team played twice. So it just so happened that we're going to get a 3rd meeting between every single team here in this quarterfinal. But we will see that. We'll see how that plays out here. But in terms of how these teams line up, one coming in hot all season, taking a few bumps in the road as of late. The other has been electric here down the stretch. And we saw what the Chaos were able to do last season in the PLL Championship Series, almost running the table come the knockout stage. And I do want to say I have a feeling that that might happen again, that the Chaos get hot here and make a run at the championship. But because I do have a future pick right now on the Archers, plus 450, I will stick with it and ride the Archers. And what is, I think, just the hardest game in general to make a pick here this weekend. Harry, who do you have in this first playoff game of the PLL postseason, Archers and Chaos?
You're not going to get much of an argument from me. I like the Archers in this one too. Like I said, I know that the Chaos kind of slowed down that offense from a goal scoring perspective over the weekend. But I think, it's still a really difficult offense to stop. And I like what they did with their defense in the offseason and how it's played out over the course of the year. The fact that they're coming into the playoffs is, one of the healthiest teams throughout the season. I like the Archers in this matchup the same as you do. I think it'll be a close one, but I just don't see the Chaos slowing down that offense after they just played last weekend.
A lot of good games we got this weekend. We're obviously going to dive into our next 2, but I just think this one could end up being the best one of the weekend. Again, I just you look at the Chaos, what they did last season, almost running the table there. They were a quarter really away from really having a chance to win that championship. If not, they would have ran the table. I'm having a sense that that's coming again, just because obviously the Chaos, they're playing their best lacrosse right now, it seems, after starting the year off slowly. But we will see. I also have the Archers here in this game, as they're set for 8:30 p.m. Eastern start on Friday night, with the Archers going in as 1.5-point favorites. The over-under set at 23.5. And the winner of this first game will move on to the semifinal to play the winner of our second quarterfinal game of the weekend on Saturday, when the second-ranked Atlas take on the Cannons after the Cannons managed to clinch the final playoff spot. And Harry, despite being the 7th seed and with just 3 wins on the season, the Cannons have played some really good lacrosse, led by some of the game's greats in Lyle Thompson, Paul Rabel, and Brody Merrill. Thompson has been phenomenal all season as expected, aside from a few down games where he was blanketed in coverage, whether it was held scoreless or pointless in one of those games. Rabel has also notably been fantastic here in 2021, coming off a huge Week 8 where he scored a 2-pointer and an assist to go along with a hat trick. 6 total points on the day for Paul Rabel. And Harry, for the Cannons to stay in this contest and win this game and move on here in the playoffs, it seems like these big names and some are going to need to step up and carry the torch, notably Rabel, Thompson, goalie Nick Morocco, and this defense, because looking at this matchup, especially at the face-off X, it seems like it's going to be a long day for Kevin Reisman. So you want to be as mindful as possible about every possession.
Yeah, you really do. And you want to limit turnovers, especially. Obviously, all eyes are going to be on, the 2 biggest names on this roster, and Paul Rabel and Lyle Thompson. But also, this is a roster that has plenty of guys who have a lot of pro lacrosse experience, especially pro outdoor experience. So they're really going to need that. You mentioned possessions are going to be super important. I know it's easier said than done to say win more faceoffs, but they do need to find a way to do that. They were the worst team facing off by the time this season ended, but they can be bad at the faceoffs and still play in really close games. We've seen them do it all season long.
All season.
They've had multiple games that were decided by 1 goal. They've lost 4 1-goal games. And in those 4 games, they were 40 and 123 at the stripe. And they lost the ground ball battle 138 to 164. So you put those 2 numbers together, I mean, they're losing out on a lot of possessions on that alone. And who knows what those games wind up as if they get 2-3 more, loose balls off the ground. So I think it's about more than just, you got to find a way to win more faceoffs, but you also need to make sure that you're scrapping for some loose balls in these games and fighting for every possible extra possession that you can get, because you're already at a disadvantage with the faceoffs there. And I expect the big names like Rabel and Lyle to show up, but it's going to be those hustle plays that the Cannons are going to absolutely need to win this game, and then possibly the ones beyond that if they can make a run to the championship. And I think that maybe they found some momentum with their first elimination game against the Chrome last week. Maybe that continues to roll over into this weekend. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see, but I think it's those hustle plays for the Cannons that they're going to need.
Possessions key here when we're looking at this game. Obviously, the Atlas boasting Trevor Baptiste, who finished the season as the top face-off specialist. So something that the Cannons will have to deal with, as they've turned to a handful of specialists to try and solve their woes at the stripe this season. Kevin Reisman holding it down in recent weeks since being traded from the Whipsnakes. He's facing off right now at 38%, as Harry mentioned, kind of towards the bottom of the league. And then just this week, along with the additions of attackman Nate Solomon and rookie attackman Adam Charlambides out of Rutgers, Coach Kirk was able to add Brendan Fowler off the physically unable to perform list, who he drafted back in the expansion draft. The only face-off specialist, he drafted 3 in that expansion draft. Fowler was the only one still on the roster. He was on the physically unable to perform list. He's just been activated off that list, set to play. Obviously, those moves accompanied by the release of Peyton Smith, midfielder Deemer Class, and attackman Brendan Sunday to make room. So Quirk making his final moves here ahead of the playoffs to get his team set, trying to get his face-off situation figured out here, and it'll be interesting to see who he turns to come Saturday. But on the other hand, Harry, Rubier stays quiet, as he has been in recent weeks on the transactions board. And they come into this quarterfinal matchup winning 5 of their last 6 games, as this young Atlas team continues to perform at a very high level game after game, looking like one of, if not the hottest team heading into the playoffs. A lot of people are starting to get behind them. And Harry, how confident are you in this Atlas squad as they begin their championship run here?
I would say that, I think I am pretty confident in what they do in the championship run. They, since Jeff Teat kind of hopped on this roster, I believe it was week 3, it really feels like a completely different Atlas team that we've seen all year, and really not that far away from getting that 1 seed instead of the Water Dogs. They just run into a really hot goaltender and a really good Water Dogs team there at the end of the season. So I definitely think that this team is a legitimate contender, and I would not be surprised if they did win the championship. And I think coming into this first game, though, against the Cannons, not an ideal matchup just because there is going to be a lot of talk around Paul Rabel, traded him away. Here you come in with this new team that everybody, it's younger, it's better than the old Paul Rabel. So, there is that storyline in there that could create some conversation in these locker rooms. I don't think, Ben Rubio, he may or may not play to that with his team, but you don't want to be in a revenge game against an underdog like the Cannons who have Paul Rabel and also Lyle Thompson. I think the one thing I look at with this game in Ben Rubio is it's kind of a final prove it moment for him where he has proven to us that, you know what, it was not a rebuild. It indeed was not a rebuild. I said on this show that the Atlas were not going to make the playoffs this season way back when I focused on them in the preseason and how they were going to do and what the outlook was. Well, they locked up, one of the better seeds, nearly the top seed. So now just prove it in playoffs. You've done it with a bunch of young guys. Now can you get the young and inexperienced leaders of your team to do it against some veterans like what the Cannons have all over the field on defense and on offense? Because you look at the main contributors on this team, a lot of them are rookies or in their sophomore years in the pro game. But Jeff Teat, rookie. Jake Carraway, rookie. Dox Aiken, who we've seen in the last couple games, rookie. Brian Costabile in his second year. Dan Baccaro in his second year. Danny Logan, a rookie on defense. So this is a very good team. They're just really young, and it's the kind of final prove-it moment for them. Go out and do it in the postseason.
Absolutely. This Atlas team looking to win their first playoff game in team history after failing to clinch a spot in 2019 and losing in round one at last summer's tournament. Obviously, you saying now that you did not believe that this Atlas team would be in this situation. I did not either. On my Twitter right now, I have a tweet pinned. Noah Lands, PLL Chirp, said the Atlas are going to surprise a lot of people this year. I put cap. It's obviously they have turned things around and they have surprised many here as we get into the playoffs. We will see if the Atlas can get this first win on Saturday of the playoffs on primetime television, NBC main broadcast at 2:30 p.m. Eastern as well. Obviously, the Atlas looking for their first win. You look at the Cannon side as well. Paul Rabel has not won a playoff game. Lyle Thompson in his first year in the PLL has not obviously won a playoff game in the PLL. Nick Morocco hasn't won a PLL playoff game. Brody Merrill has not won a PLL playoff game. So a lot of Cannons players here trying to get their first win here in the playoffs and move on to the semifinals. And also going into this game, question marks still surround goalie Jack Concannon's status, and we should hopefully hear more on Friday ahead of this playoff game. He is questionable as per the latest league injury report, but in his absence, goalie JD Colarusso is now 3-1. And Harry, the Atlas come in as goal and a half favorites, over under set at 25.5 for what has been so far a matchup that has given us two high scoring games that have been decided by a single goal in each one. The Atlas winning both games. Do you think they can sweep the season series here against the Cannons this weekend?
I definitely think they do. It's something that I think that I'm a little hesitant to it. I think that the Cannons with the upset is that's the hot upset, right? Because you have the storyline there with Paul Rabel, the team that traded him. It's hard to bet against Lyle Thompson. Plenty of veterans on the Cannons team. But I think that one thing with the youth on this team, it is kind of, it kind of works both ways. There's the inexperience there, but also with some of these young guys straight out of college, I mean, they have the advantage and, they've been through the college conditioning. They're fresh out of college. They kind of have a leg up in the athleticism department. And then really, I mean, Jeff Teat, he's a rookie, but he's not playing like a rookie.
Not at all.
So I definitely think that the Atlas can pull it off this weekend. If we're getting into picks right now, I'll go ahead and jump ahead of that. I am going to pick the Atlas in this game. I like them. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be high scoring, just like we've seen before. But I think the Atlas are going to find a way through just their athleticism and playmaking ability.
So we both got the Archers. We both also have the Atlas. I'm picking the Atlas here as well. You said it though. It's the playmaking ability of these young guys, of these rookies, I think is the difference in this game. I think we'll see a lot from Danny Logan there at the short stick defensive midfield position. I think he makes a big impact in this game. And then really the question marks I have though, who's going to start in goal? I don't really think it matters because JD Colarusso has been playing so well here over recent weeks. If he was to get the start if Jack Concannon was to whether it's on the bench or if he's just not dressed at all. I still would feel confident going with the Atlas here this weekend. Definitely someone to watch here as we go into it. But all 3 games this weekend, ironically, as I said before, they do represent the 3rd meeting of the season between the 2 teams involved, and that will continue on Saturday night with what is probably the most notable matchup on paper and historically, as we'll get another meeting between the Redwoods and the Whipsnakes, the rubber match for these 2 teams, as the Redwoods held the Whipsnakes to just 7 goals back in week 5. The Whipsnakes then were able to hold on and beat the Redwoods 14-12 last weekend in week 8. And Harry, this matchup has given us some awesome games in the past. Obviously, the championship game from the inaugural season, semifinal game from last year's PLL bubble. It should be safe to say that this will continue tonight with this string of great games between these 2 teams.
Yeah, I think it definitely will, especially because it's the playoffs. There's really only been 2 games, three games, I guess. If you go back to the beginning of the bubble, then there was one in 2019, and then the game this year without Matt Rambo, where the games haven't been particularly close. But when there's some stakes thrown on the line here, when it's playoff time, these teams have a history of playing some great games. 2019, I don't remember what the deficit was, but I know it was large. And the Redwoods come back in that one and force overtime. They make another comeback, a competitive game last season in the bubble, lose that one in overtime. So if history repeats itself, which we all know it does, expect another great one on our hands to kind of finish things off on Saturday night. I think it's going to be really fun.
The Whipsnakes will come in boasting the team that has won back-to-back titles in the league's first 2 seasons, and they will attempt to defend their title for a second time here, getting a lot of their notable guys back and healthy, as you said, most notably Matt Rambo. He made his return over the weekend, scoring 7 goals and 2 assists in 2 games. Zed Williams scored like 7 goals or something, 9 goals maybe, getting back into his form. Justin Gutterding, recently acquired by the Whipsnakes from the Chrome, getting into his own and getting settled in on this new offense. So we'll see how they look. But for the Redwoods, they will be without faceoff specialist T.D. Erlin as he left last Friday's game against the Whipsnakes with a leg injury. He was then seen on the sideline in a leg brace. He talked to the NBC's Paul Burmeister and gave some updates there on the sideline. MRIs lined up for this week. We'd imagine that they've been done by now, but he was placed on the injured list. And then in the report that we just got here on Wednesday afternoon when we're recording this, his status is officially out with a lower lower extremity injury. Imagining that it is his leg or knee. Huge blow to this Redwoods team, Harry, because they finally get that last piece that they've been lacking the past 2 seasons in beating this Whipsnakes team. And they'll now be without him this weekend in their first elimination game here of the 2021 playoffs.
Yeah, you said it, a huge blow. I mean, the way that Nat St. Laurent was kind of able to maneuver his way into getting T.D. Erlin in the college draft.
Just sitting there and waiting.
How he fell to the woods. I mean, it even goes back to 2020 when you have the college season ends and TD's not going to PLL. He goes and plays a year at Denver, and then you wait for that next college. I mean, who knows where T.D. Erlin winds up if he's in the draft in 2020? It gets pushed back. You know,
the Water Dogs.
Yeah, and so now he lands in the Redwoods. I mean, fell right in their laps when they needed face-off help. And this was supposed to be the difference maker, as this was the guy who's going to come in and get them over that hump and make them champions of the PLL. And that's what it looked like for most of the season. I mean, he was dominant. I believe he was 65% from the stripe, which is tied with Trevor Baptiste for the majority of the year. He was in first place from a face-off percentage standpoint. He took every single face-off that he could possibly take for the Redwoods until he got injured. So, yeah, definitely a huge blow. Possessions are going to become so much more valuable for the Woods now. We saw in the very first game this season, which obviously things have changed since then, but the Redwoods turned the ball over a lot in a game that they won by 1 goal against the Cannons. They don't win games playing like that without T.D. Erlin, who went over 70% on faceoffs that game. So a massive blow to this team.
The Redwoods, out of caution, and as we can now see, out of need, went out and grabbed Juice Simno off of the Whipsnakes reserve roster, as he has not played within the last 3 weeks after getting traded from the Cannons to the Whipsnakes. So now you look at that Chris Hogan trade, or the Kevin Rice, whatever you want to call it, Kevin Reisman trade. The Whipsnakes got Hogan in return, got Simno in return. Simno is now on the Redwoods. Hogan is on the holdout list, so that trade painting the picture there for that trade to send Kevin Raceman to the Cannons. But the Redwoods add a backup or possibly the guy to go up against Joe Nardella in Saturday's playoff game with TD Erlin scratched. We'll see how the Redwoods can adapt and adjust. Obviously, the offense over the weekend really stepped up and carried a lot of the load. Miles Jones, most notably. We'll see if they can stay hot against this Whipsnakes team. But as you're saying, the turnovers playing a big factor here into how we're looking at kind of making picks for this game. Redwoods and Whipsnakes. I like the Redwoods coming in, but now with TD not playing this weekend, I'm kind of starting to second guess my choice here. I'm going to let you pick first, though. Redwoods and Whipsnakes. Whipsnakes favored by 1.5 before this announcement of TD not playing. Who do you like in this one, though?
I am going to roll the dice here. I'm going to go with the Redwoods. And my reasoning behind it is you're tempted to go away with TD Erlin not playing in this matchup. But I mean, they went to overtime with the Whipsnakes last year without a good face-off unit. And I don't see why they can't beat the Whipsnakes just because they don't have TD Erlin. We know that the Redwoods have a really good defense. And one thing I look at with the Whipsnakes is Kyle Bernlohr has not been the same goalie this year as he was last year. He's been struggling to find some consistency. He has been above 50% once in his last 5 games. So that's not really ideal coming into the playoffs. So I think even though Rambo's healthy and that offense seems to be rolling, the Redwoods, they've proven that they can keep up with this Whipsnakes team, even if they're not great from a face-off perspective. I think most importantly, the offense needs to take care of the ball. And then there's a lot of guys on this defense who wear their emotions on their sleeves. They're going to need to keep those emotions in check. This is going to be a heated game. It was a heated game last Friday. There were some late hits in that game. There was some pushing and shoving going on afterwards, and I'm sure there's going to be even more of that. So can you stay off the penalty kill, basically, if you're the Redwoods and not turn the ball over? I think they can edge out a close game against the Whipsnakes.
Definitely expecting an emotional game here from both teams. Obviously, as we talked about historically over the past 2 seasons, plus, the season that we've had here in 2021, a lot of big games between these two teams. And this will now be the 3rd playoff game that we see between the Redwoods and the Whipsnakes, as we said before. Championship game in 2019, the Whipsnakes were able to hold on in overtime. Last season in the PLL bubble in the semifinal, the Whipsnakes able to hold on in overtime at the semifinal. And then this season, we'll see them play in the quarterfinal. We'll see who gets the win. You've got the Redwoods. We both have the Archers in the Atlas. I'm going to take the Whipsnakes, though, in this one. I feel like now they're bringing in they're bringing all their poles back. Obviously, this is the team, as we were talking about last week. I was talking about it with Liam and Jordan. We talked about it, me and Austin, on earlier in the week on Tuesday on the PLL Flash. It's like this is the team that we all said at the beginning of the year that we would not bet against. We would not pick against them until they lost or until we actually saw a matchup where it's like, all right, maybe they're not playing at their best, the Whipsnakes, but we see a spot here in the schedule where it's like, all right, we can pick against the Whipsnakes because this is the team that we said we wouldn't pick against. And I'm going to go back to that because last weekend I didn't pick the Whipsnakes in either game. I picked the Redwoods and I picked the Archers. The Whipsnakes obviously got the win against the Redwoods. I'm going to say that they win again this weekend against that Redwoods team. Again, you said you don't think that the TD absence is going to be as big. I think Joe Nardella could win north of 70% this weekend if he's on his game. He obviously was this past weekend. I believe him and TD almost split there on Friday night. Joe Nardella actually might have had the advantage in that game. Obviously, Erlin did not play in the 4th quarter, but then Joe Nardella had a big day there on Sunday against the Archers. So we'll see how that one goes. Obviously, the face-off battle, one that we will be watching as we get close to that game and as that game gets started. But I got the Whipsnakes in this one. I don't know if they cover the 1.5. Obviously, we've had close games between these two teams, so I think Redwoods plus 1.5 might be a play, but I definitely have the Whipsnakes winning this one over the weekend.
All right.
So obviously, those are our 3 games. And then with those 3 quarterfinal games, obviously looking forward to that for the weekend today, which I believe this show might be going out on Thursday, might be going out on Friday. But we have season award finalists set to be announced on Thursday, or at least the voting will be submitted there this Thursday, the 19th. So we will see all of our award finalists. They will be voted the finalists will be voted on by the players and the coaches. The award recipients, the winners, will then be announced at the PLL end of the year ceremony the weekend of the championship game. So that is the weekend of September 19th in Washington, D.C. Winners will be announced by the PLL Lacrosse Advisory Board, the PLL front office, and media. So we will see how those winners come about. But we have a few awards here that we can dive into. Me and Austin talked about the Goalie of the Year back on Tuesday, the Goalie of the Year finalists. Obviously, Blaise Reardon looking like obviously he's the two-time defending winner of this award. He's a finalist. Lock him in. I think you can lock in Adam Gittleman as well. Obviously, the 62% save percentage leads the league. For that third finalist spot, Tim Troutner, Dylan Ward. Me and Austin were kind of throwing it back and forth because Tim Troutner, obviously, he's been consistent all year. Dylan Ward's been great throughout the last couple of weeks. Obviously, the Water Dogs winning 4 straight here. You're looking at this award. 3 finalists, Troutner, Ward, kind of the last name to add to that list. Who would you add in as your third finalist here for the Goalie of the Year?
I'm going Dylan Ward. I think Tim Troutner definitely really good, and I think he's one of the more elite goalies in the league. But what Ward has done over the last handful of games for the Water Dogs, I mean, he's been awesome. He has stopped shots at just an incredible clip, and I think that we really have started to see what makes Dylan Ward so good. He hasn't been below 60% as far as the save percentage during their win streak here to end this season over their last 4. So he had a game where the Water Dogs as a team got pulled in the game against the Redwoods where they let in 19 goals. Since then, he's been unreal. He's been unstoppable. I think that he has been some Zach Courier fans might get mad at me here, but I think that Dylan Ward has been the most valuable piece in them turning their season around and getting that 1 seed because he has just shut the door on so many teams down the stretch.
Dylan Ward, as we talked about with Michael Sowers before, hopefully returning, hopefully going to be playing at the level that we expected and that we saw while he was in college. Dylan Ward started the year off slowly. He has been phenomenal here over the last couple of weekends, propelling his team into this playoff spot, not just into a playoff spot, but into the number 1 overall seed, kind of coming out of nowhere here over the last couple of weeks. Another position I want to talk about, the short stick defensive midfield position, because it's kind of an overlooked position sometimes. Very, very important when it comes to the game of lacrosse. Obviously, Zach Courier, I'd imagine his name is up for the Midfielder of the Year award. I don't even know if he could be up for this award as well. The Hard Hat award for the best short stick defensive midi. Other names I got here, though. Zach Goodrich, obviously, for the Cannons. He was the reigning 2020 MLL Defensive Player of the Year. Dominic Alexander with the Archers has had a great season there on that. The best defensive unit in the league here in 2021. Matt Abbott has put up some great numbers. And then we got 2 rookies, Ryan Terefenko for the Chrome, Danny Logan for the Atlas, who have had great seasons thus far, both defensively and then translating that onto, the offensive end. You kind of look at this list here that we got, 3 finalists allowed. Who would be your 3 finalists if you were to choose them?
Are you talking MVP or offensive player?
Short stick defensive midfield.
Short stick defensive midi. I'm sorry about that, but you mentioned Zach Courier, and I don't know how you don't go Zach Courier here. My only thing is it's almost doing a disservice to Zach Courier's game to classify him as a short stick D midi because he does so much else.
He's probably going to be up for the Midfielder of the Year award as well. I'd imagine he's a finalist. Yeah. I would be surprised if he doesn't win that award.
And that's just how crazy good he is there's a legitimate push for him to be the short stick D midi of the year. I think that he's much more than that, but he definitely could win the award. I'm a huge Zach Goodrich fan. I think that one thing that he does is you don't really realize how much of an impact he has on games until you go and watch whatever game back he just played in, where he is fearless in whatever matchup he takes. I think we saw earlier in the year, he was not afraid of Michael Sowers in that first game that Michael Sowers played. And he's really not afraid of anybody. And he's not a short stick D-mid that if you're a defenseman, you really have to worry about sliding a whole lot when he's on that matchup. I like him. And then Dominic Alexander, it would be my third personally. I think that he's been awesome for the Archers over the last handful of years. I don't think enough people talked about him in those first 2 years. People are starting to notice a little bit more of his impact for that team, whether it be ground balls or just taking matchups. Matt Abbott, definitely a guy who likes to run a lot, but he's just on the outside for me. My top three would be Courier, Goodrich, and Alexander. But you mentioned some of those young guys, Tarasenko, Danny Logan, bright future for them.
Absolutely. And obviously, looking at Zach Courier's name, too, I mean, I have him currently as an MVP favorite. So something to watch there as we get into a little MVP talk. We'll start with Rookie of the Year talk, though. 4 finalists is what will be chosen. Obviously, Jeff Teat, I think you could probably hand him the award right now if you really wanted to. But we've had a number of other great performances here out of the rookies. Obviously, T.D. Erlin won't be playing this weekend, but facing off at 65%. That is tied for the league lead, 79 ground balls. That is towards the top of the league in terms of ground balls. Then you look at some of the attackmen on this list. Stephen Rafis for the Cannons has been great. 25 points, second among rookies in terms of points. He second among goals as well. Jackson Morrill, 22 points for the Chrome. Jake Carraway for that Atlas team with Jeff Teat, 21 points. And at the start of the season, it seemed like Jake Carraway was kind of going to be one of the front runners for this award in terms of how great he was playing. Teat obviously came in and just was magnificent. But then you look also at these 2 defensive middies, Ryan Tarasenko, Danny Logan have put together great seasons. But it seems like this would be a Jeff Teat, a T.D. Erlin, and then you fill in the other 2 names. What other 2 names are you looking at in terms of the Rookie of the Year?
I'm looking at Stephen Rafis with the Cannons. I think he's really surprised me this year. I knew that there were a lot of people, especially Syracuse fans, who were big on Rafis in the pro game. I wasn't sure if I was buying into the hype, but he really found a way to stick out on that Cannons team that has guys like Lyle Thompson and Paul Rabel. So I was impressed with him this season. And then Jake Carraway's the other one. Just barely edges out Jackson Morrill for me because, I mean, Carraway's really come on strong this year, and I didn't expect him to. And he's been a big part of that Atlas turnaround. And it's not a disservice to Morrill because I think he stepped in and he's done a great job this season, especially with the pieces that Chrome wound up missing due to injuries during the season. But Jake Carraway was a big part of the team that helped earn the number 2 or a playoff spot at least this season. So I got to go with him.
The MVP award will allow 5 finalists. We kind of know who a few of them should be. Obviously, Jeff Teat, we just talked about him. 32 points this season, 16 goals and 16 assists, split evenly, shooting 40%. And he's played 7 games, which is too shy of pretty much everybody else. Obviously, we have Grant Ament, Lyle Thompson that put together great seasons as well. Grant Ament, the points leader. Lyle Thompson is among the goals leader. I believe there's multiple. So those are really our top 3 names. Zach Courier, another name that I would like to throw in here to this MVP conversation, having a phenomenal season with the War Dogs, whether it's scoring goals, dishing off assists, picking up ground balls, whether it's in the middle of the field, on the wings, causing turnovers, doing whatever this team needs. Who would be like a 5th guy that you look at in terms of an MVP caliber player, whether it's a goalie, looking at some of the face-off guys, maybe another attackman, or obviously a midfielder?
I think a legitimate MVP candidate to take that 5th spot would be Blaise Reardon. Mentioning him earlier in the show and just exactly how good he is. I think he's responsible for the majority of Chaos's wins this season just because of how good he is in goal and how many shots he sees on a consistent basis. He's had at least 15 saves in over half his games this season. He's only had 1 game where he was below 55% saving shots. So, I mean, that screams goalie of the year, and that screams MVP candidate to me. When you look at who is the most valuable player to their team, I don't see how it's not Blaise Reardon for the Chaos. I think that he does deserve that 5th spot because of how lights out he's been. I mean, think about how difficult and frustrating it has to be for an offense when you watch Blaise play in these games and just save shots after shots after shots, how frustrating that has to be when you're the guy who's trying to put the ball in the back of the net, because he will not fall into any sort of inconsistencies. He's just been incredible this season.
1 4 of 6 here on this stretch for the Chaos. A lot of that credit to Blaise Reardon. They have a +3 goal differential in that time. So tight games, whether they're tight games, or wider margins, Blaise stepping up big, carrying this Chaos team, and obviously most likely going to be the goalie of the year for the 3rd year in a row. Throwing his name in the MVP conversation as well. Obviously 5 finalists. We will see how those finalists shape out, obviously, on Thursday. Last award I want to talk about, and then I'll also have an article that I'm working on kind of predicting my finalists ahead of Thursday's announcement of the finalists for these awards. But the Coach of the Year, big award, obviously very I would say just a big award if you're a coach of the year, a great recognition, obviously for the work that you've done, whether it was the off season, all season, and then into obviously the playoffs. Obviously, it probably won't count playoff results, but we've had, I think, the two front runners for this Coach of the Year award that have put together, whether it was, like I said, great offseason into a great season. Ben Rubio with the Atlas, Andy Copeland with the Water Dogs, obviously the jobs that they've both done. Ben Rubio, as we talked about before, sending away a lot of the big names that he had in the past, there in 2020 that was on this Atlas team in 2019 before he got here. Complete retool, as we've used that term many times to describe this Atlas team. Retool over the offseason. It was a rough week one. Obviously, picked it back up in week two, and they have been flying high ever since. Andy Copeland as well, brought in a lot of new names, whether it was Ryan Brown, Mike Sowers, who hasn't played obviously much, Dylan Ward in goal there. He sent a first-round pick in next year's college draft for Dylan Ward, which obviously the Water Dogs #1 seed, if they're towards the end of this second round, could pay off very well for them that they bring in Dylan Ward, make a run at this championship. Third name that I'm kind of tossing here, third name for this finalist, I'm tossing between two, Nat St. Laurent and Chris Bates, obviously just the next two teams here on the standings. But it looks like this is a two-man race, Ben Rubio and Andy Copeland. Who are you looking at right now? Obviously, a couple weeks away from the championship, but from what we've seen from the offseason, from the season thus far, who do you like there as your Coach of the Year for the 2021 season?
I like Andy Copeland. I like him because, and he just barely edges out Ben Rubio. And
they've both what they've done in this offseason in terms of just the retool for Atlas, just the reloading for the Water Dogs, really bringing in. I didn't even mention Mikey Schlosser, just a ton of names that they brought in here. Liam Burns, Ben Randall, completely remaking this defense, bringing in Eli Gobrecht. Great job by Andy Copeland, really, this entire season.
Yeah, he has done an awesome job. Did not look good at the start of the year.
Did not look good.
Turned it around, and I mean, Ben Rubio did a similar thing. He kind of turned it around when Jeff Teat showed up. Like Jeff Teat shows up after week 2, and that's when things start to change for Atlas. For Copeland, his #2 pick goes down after his first game of the year, and he has to find a way to get this thing back on track because it was off the rails after week 1. And he had to find a way to kind of steady the course and get them where they need to be. And he's done exactly that. And he got the 1 seed. I think that if the Atlas got the 1 seed, I'd be telling you Ben Rubio right now. To me, that game right there decided it just because that's how close the race is between these two guys. But yeah, it's not a discredit to Rubio because that's an awesome team that he built with the Atlas. I wouldn't be surprised if either one of them walked away as champs. But I think Copeland edges it out because of where they started, what he had to do with his roster during the season, and then the fact that they wind up as the #1 seed.
Definitely a conversation that we will be revisiting as we get closer there to the championship when these awards will be announced, because definitely a notable thing, Coach of the Year. It's a very big deal here for the PLL. Obviously, we didn't have many of these awards last season at the 2020 championship series. They kind of just did MVP. That was the MVP of the finals. That was the MVP of the season. That's kind of just all they rode with. But this season, we'll see this whole slate of award winners, or of awards, I should say, reintroduced. Very excited. We'll be talking much more about them in the coming weeks. But before I let you go, Harry, championship pick here ahead of the playoffs. Who is it?
I am going with the Archers. I thought at the beginning of this year that what they built through the drafts this offseason, the players they brought in, they really bolstered that defense. That defense went from good to, I think, tough and physical and great. So I think that the offense has always been there. What they were missing was the defense, somebody who can get physical with a guy like Matt Rambo. And so I like what they did, especially with Graham Hossack on that roster. I'm sticking with my pick at the beginning of the year. I think the Archers are going to win it all.
When I came into this season, obviously, in terms of when I came into this season, I loved the Water Dogs, as we just talked about with Andy Copeland. Their remake, their reloading of during the offseason for this 2021 season. I was big on the Water. I said they're going to have a turnaround, like some people said about the Atlas, and I said no, I don't believe that's going to happen. Obviously, we saw it happen, but I was saying that with the Water Dogs. I think this team is going to turn it around and surprise a lot of people here in 2021. They've done that. They've played very, very well here in 2021. I currently have a plus 1,100 future bet for the Water Dogs. So that would be very nice if we can cash that.
That
I have a
would be-
plus 450 with the Archers. So those are the two teams I'm going to ride with. And then I'll throw the Atlas in there just in terms of the odds. They're at plus 425. I'm looking at it right now. So those are three teams I think have the best chance. I also like the Archers because I think this team, they have the right pieces, whether it's defensively, whether it's offensively. Pretty much, I think this matchup, Archers Chaos, would be a tougher one to decide, I think, than Archers Atlas. I think I would have the Archers just in terms of how I'm looking at that matchup. I think the Archers would have the upper hand. Something that obviously could be debatable, but I also like the Archers here. I think the one thing that could be holding them back, though, is the face-off position, which if they can get the Redwoods here in a semifinal matchup, would play to their advantage. Obviously, they have the Chaos. Max Adler has been struggling this season, but I'm going to go with you there. I like the Archers here as my championship pick, but again, we're riding out a few of these other ones. I like the War Dogs. I think the Atlas there are one that could be a semifinal contender as well. We'll see, as obviously the teams that advance to the semifinal, their chances grow a lot more. So we'll see here as we get into the first playoff weekend here of the 2021 season. But Harry, I want to thank you for joining me, my man. A lot to talk about today as we look ahead to the first round of the Premier Lacrosse League playoffs. But that is going to do it for today's show. I want to thank you all for watching and or listening. Obviously, Harry as well. Thank you for joining us. If you are not already, make sure to subscribe to Goal Line Extended on YouTube and hit that notification bell so that you get notified of future shows. You can also follow along on Instagram and Twitter at GL Extended. All of the links that you will need will be in the description of the video or podcast that you are watching or listening to right now. And make sure to head on over to lacrosseflash.com as well as the Lacrosse Flash YouTube channel. You can check out all of our content looking ahead to this weekend's games. And as I said before, we will be back on Tuesday with the PLL Flash to recap this weekend's quarterfinals and then begin looking ahead to the semifinals from Philly, Pennsylvania. So make sure to like, follow, and subscribe so that you don't miss any of it. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Enjoy the first weekend of playoff lacrosse, and we will talk to you on Tuesday. Cheers.
Follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at GL Extended and subscribe to the show on any of your favorite podcast outlets. You can find Lacrosse Flash on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook and online at lacrosseflash.com.